Our planet is in real trouble. We're facing this massive health crisis, and it's all driven by pollution and environmental damage. We've got tons of laws that are supposed to protect us, but they're clearly not getting the job done. So that got us thinking about a pretty radical idea. What if the way we think about law itself is actually part of the problem? Let's dive in and see. Okay, I want to start with just one number, 9 million. Get this. According to a major study from the Lancet Commission, that's how many people died prematurely from pollution in just one single year. This isn't some abstract number on a chart. We're talking about a massive global public health emergency. Now, let's put that number into perspective, because this is where it gets really staggering. We all see the headlines about wars and violence, right? And we think that's the biggest threat out there. But look at this data. Pollution is responsible for 15 times more deaths. I mean, let that sink in. It is, no exaggeration, one of the deadliest forces on our planet right now. So all of this just leads to one really big, tough question. We have all these systems in place, right? Governments, international treaties, legal frameworks, the whole shebang is supposed to stop this from happening. So why is it all failing so badly when it comes to protecting our environment? All right, to get to the bottom of that, we first need to look at how we usually think about law. You can kind of picture it as society's one and only official rulebook. Now, there's a fancy term for this. It's called legal positivism. But the idea is actually super simple. It basically says that a rule only counts as a real law if the government says it is. It has to come from a parliament or a court or some official body like that. Anything else? Well, that's just a nice suggestion, not a real rule. It's a very clear, top-down, we make the rules, you follow them kind of system. Okay, but here's the problem. When you try to use that rigid, top-down system for messy, complicated environmental problems, well, the cracks start to show, big time. Enforcement, often super weak. Those big international agreements we hear about, a lot of them have no real teeth. And what about the courts? So often they end up putting short-term economic wins ahead of long-term environmental health. On top of all that, the laws themselves are just too slow and too vague to deal with a crisis that's moving this fast. And this quote here really hits the nail on the head. It says, "Constitutional environmental provisions can only be as effective as the laws which give them detail and the courts which enforce them." I mean, think about that. A country can write, everyone has the right to a healthy environment, right into its constitution, but those are just words on paper. They're totally meaningless without detailed laws to make them real, and even more important, courts that will actually stand up and enforce them. That one official rulebook, it's just not enough. So, if that whole top-down, government-only approach is full of holes, what's the alternative? Is there another way to think about this? Well, maybe the answer is to start looking for law in some pretty unexpected places. And this brings us to a completely different idea called legal pluralism. And it basically flips that old model right on its head. It says, hey, wait a minute, law isn't just what the government makes. It recognizes that in any society, you've got tons of different rule systems all working at the same time. So it's not one single rule book anymore. It's more like a whole library. So what does that actually look like? Well, legal pluralism says we should, for example, look at the ancient customs of indigenous communities, the ways they've managed their lands for centuries, and recognize that as a form of law. Or think about the internal codes of conduct that giant corporations use to manage their supply chains. That's a set of rules, too. Even the standards set up by activist networks, they all create order, they all have influence. Legal pluralism says these are all different kinds of law, and they all matter. Okay, so now we've got these two big ideas on the table. You've got the old school government is king view and this new laws everywhere approach. So let's put them head to head. It's time for a showdown to see how they really compare. We're going to break this showdown into 3 rounds. We'll look at their structure, their approach to solving problems, and how they think about power. Let's dive into each one and see what the real difference is. All right, round 1, structure. Legal positivism is like a rigid pyramid, right? Everything has to go up the chain of command, through the courts. It's slow and inflexible. But pluralism, that's more like a flexible, interconnected web. It's all about collaboration. A perfect example is in Palau. There, the traditional Council of Chiefs works directly with the government to create marine protected areas. They don't have to wait around for some slow-moving court system. They can just work together and get it done. Okay, next up is their approach. Positivism is all about rules on paper, very theoretical. Pluralism, on the other hand, is all about what works in the real world. It's pragmatic. A great case study for this is the Sami reindeer herders up in Scandinavia. Their laws for managing grazing herds aren't written down in some official book. Nope. They're based on centuries of knowledge about how the animals behave and what the land can handle. It's a living, breathing set of rules that changes with the environment, which is exactly the kind of thing you need for these problems. And finally, let's talk about power. Who gets the final say? In the old positivist model, the answer is simple: the state. It has total control. But we've seen where that can lead. The Bhopal chemical disaster in India is just a horrific reminder of what happens when the government fails to do its job. So what's the pluralist idea? It suggests relaxing that state power. It's about sharing control. So other groups, like NGOs that set up things like eco-certifications, can step up and create their own rules that actually have real-world impact. So what does this all mean? If we start to really embrace this more flexible, pluralist way of thinking, what could the future of environmental protection actually look like? Well, the potential upside is pretty huge. For starters, it could lead to solutions that are way more flexible and can actually adapt as the environment changes. It really empowers the people on the ground, local communities, scientific experts, to have a real say. Instead of just rigid, drawn-out court battles, it encourages negotiation. It recognizes that good, effective rules can come from all sorts of places. And it has this really cool tool called interlegality. You can think of it like building a common language. It helps bridge the gaps so that scientists, community leaders, and government officials can finally start speaking the same language and work together effectively. Look, the main takeaway here is really important. This isn't about getting rid of government laws, not at all. It's about expanding our view of what law even is. It's about seeing that rules and order are living, breathing things that you can find in local communities, inside big companies, and in ancient traditions. And if we can learn to tap into all of those sources, well, we might just find smarter, faster, and more democratic ways to protect this planet we all share. And that really leaves us with a huge and kind of provocative question to think about. As we look to the future, how much control should we hand over to these other groups? I mean, to what extent should a local community or a group of scientists or even a global corporation get to write the rules for our environmental future? That's the challenge, finding that perfect balance. That's the puzzle that this whole idea of legal pluralism asks us to solve.